Some love stories begin with a glance across a crowded room, but Sarah's began with a mysterious letter slipped under her door on a Tuesday morning, written in elegant cursive by a stranger who had noticed the way she touched books as if they held secrets meant only for her. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, when the maple leaves were just beginning to blush with autumn's touch. Sarah Chen had been living in the converted attic apartment above Mrs. Henderson's bookshop for exactly 3 months, and in all that time she had received nothing more exciting than utility bills and grocery store circulars. So, when she found the cream-colored envelope slipped under her door, her name written in elegant cursive across the front, her heart gave a little flutter of curiosity. There was no return address, no postmark, just her name, Sarah Chen, written. As if the sender had taken great care with each letter, she turned the envelope over in her hands, noting the weight of the paper, the slight texture that suggested quality stationery. Inside, she found a single sheet of matching paper with words that would change the trajectory of her quiet life. Dear Sarah, I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I've noticed you in the bookshop below, always choosing poetry collections and classic novels. There's something about the way you handle books, as if each one contains a secret you're hoping to discover. I find myself wondering what stories you carry within yourself. I know this is unconventional, but would you be willing to correspond with a fellow lover of literature? If so, simply leave a book of your choosing on the windowsill of your apartment, visible from the street. No pressure, just curiosity from someone who believes that the most beautiful connections begin with shared words. Yours, in literature, a friend. Sarah read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of thoughtfulness in the carefully chosen words. She had moved to the small college town of Millbrook to escape the chaos of her previous life in the city, seeking solitude and simplicity while she figured out her next steps. The idea of mysterious correspondence both thrilled and terrified her, but there was something undeniably romantic about the old-fashioned approach that appealed to her writer's heart. The next morning, after a sleepless night of debate, Sarah placed a worn copy of Pablo Neruda's 20 love poems and a song of despair on her windowsill, its spine facing outward like a beacon. She had discovered the collection during her freshman year of college, and it had remained her constant companion through heartbreaks and healing, through lonely nights and moments of pure joy. If her mysterious correspondent truly appreciated literature, they would understand the significance of her choice. She spent the day stealing glances at the window, wondering if someone was watching, wondering if she had made the right decision. When she returned from her evening walk, the book was gone, replaced by another cream-colored envelope. This letter was longer, filled with thoughtful observations about Neruda's ability to capture the intensity of love and loss in simple yet profound language. Dear Sarah, it began, your choice of Neruda tells me everything I hoped to know about your soul. Anyone who understands the ache in love is so short, forgetting is so long, is someone worth knowing. I spent the afternoon reading your copy, noting the passages you've underlined, the margins where you've written yes or exactly in your careful handwriting. It's like reading a map of your heart. In return, I'm leaving you a book that has shaped my understanding of love and literature. I hope you'll find something worthwhile in its pages. Tell me what draws you to poetry. What makes your heart skip? When you read certain lines, I find myself genuinely curious about the woman who chooses to live above a bookshop and reads Neruda by lamplight. Until your next letter, your literary companion. Attached was a pristine first edition of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnets from the Portuguese, and Sarah's breath caught when she realized the value of such a gift from a stranger. So began the most extraordinary correspondence of Sarah's life, a daily exchange of letters that grew longer and more intimate with each passing week. Her mysterious friend, who began signing letters as Marcus after the third exchange, revealed himself to be a professor of comparative literature at the local college, though he remained deliberately vague about other personal details. Sarah learned that he had traveled extensively, that he spoke 4 languages, that he had a particular fondness for Russian novels and French poetry. In return, she shared her own story gradually, telling him about her work as a freelance editor, her dreams of writing a novel, her reason for seeking refuge in Millbrook after a painful breakup that had left her questioning everything she thought she knew about love. Their letters became the highlight of her days, each one a carefully crafted work of art that revealed new depths of personality and intellect. Marcus wrote about literature with the passion of someone who truly lived and breathed books, but he also shared observations about life, about the changing seasons, about the small moments of beauty he noticed in daily existence. He told her about the way morning light fell across his desk when he graded papers, about the student who had written a particularly insightful essay on Shakespearean sonnets, about the elderly couple he saw walking hand in hand every evening past his office window. Sarah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, sharing not just her thoughts on books, but her fears, her hopes, her dreams of creating something meaningful with her writing. She told him about the novel she had been working on for 3 years, how she had abandoned it after her ex-boyfriend dismissed it as self-indulgent romantic fantasy, how she was slowly finding the courage to return to those pages in the quiet sanctuary of her attic apartment. As October painted the town in brilliant oranges and reds, their correspondence evolved into something deeper than literary discussion. Marcus began sharing more personal revelations, admitting that he had noticed Sarah long before writing his first letter, that he had been struck by her grace and quiet beauty, but had been too shy to approach her directly. "I've always been better with written words than spoken ones," he confessed in one letter. "In person, I become tongue-tied and awkward, but on paper, I can show you who I really am. Is that cowardice or wisdom? I'm not sure anymore." Sarah understood completely, having always felt more articulate in writing than in face-to-face conversation. She wrote back about her own social anxieties, her tendency to overthink every interaction, her preference for the written word, where thoughts could be carefully considered and perfectly expressed. Their letters became increasingly romantic, though neither acknowledged the shift directly. Marcus wrote about imagining conversations with her, about wondering what her laugh sounded like, about dreaming of someday holding her hand while discussing their favorite passages from beloved books. Sarah found herself confessing that she looked forward to his letters more than anything else in her day, that she had begun writing her responses in her head during long walks, that she sometimes pressed his letters to her chest after reading. them inhaling the faint scent of his cologne that lingered on the paper. The tension between them built slowly, beautifully, like a symphony reaching its crescendo, and Sarah began to realize that she was falling in love with a man she had never seen, whose voice she had never heard, whose presence she knew only through carefully chosen words on cream-colored paper. November brought the first snow, and with it a letter that changed everything. Marcus wrote with unusual vulnerability about his past, revealing that he had been married briefly in his 20s to a woman who had left him for someone more outgoing and socially confident. She told me that living with me was like being married to a ghost, he wrote, always present but never fully there. She needed someone who could match her energy, someone who could be the life of the party rather than the person reading in the corner. I've spent years believing she was right, that my quiet nature made me insufficient as a partner. But your letters have shown me that perhaps I was simply with the wrong person, someone who couldn't appreciate the depth that comes with stillness, the intimacy that comes with truly listening. You make me feel seen in a way I've never experienced before, understood in my complexity rather than criticized for my contradictions. Sarah's heart ached for him as she read his words, recognizing in his story echoes of her own past relationship. Her ex-boyfriend had similarly criticized her introspective nature, her need for solitude and quiet contemplation, her preference for deep conversation over small talk. He had tried to change her, to make her more extroverted and socially aggressive, and when she couldn't transform into his ideal partner, he had dismissed not just her personality, but her dreams and aspirations as well. She wrote back immediately, pouring out her own story of romantic disappointment and self-doubt, assuring Marcus that his thoughtful, reflective nature was not a flaw, but a gift. The world has enough loud voices, she wrote, but it desperately needs more people who think before they speak, who observe before they act, who understand that true intimacy comes not from constant chatter, but from comfortable silences and profound understanding. You are not too quiet, Marcus. You are perfectly, beautifully yourself, and anyone who cannot see that is missing out on something extraordinary. Their December letters took on a new urgency as both began to acknowledge that their correspondence had evolved far beyond friendship. Sarah found herself writing love letters disguised as literary analysis, pouring her growing feelings into discussions of romantic poetry and classic love stories. Marcus responded in kind, using metaphors from literature to express emotions that seemed too large for simple confession. You have become my Elizabeth Bennet, he wrote in one particularly memorable letter, challenging my preconceptions, making me want to be a better man, bringing light into corners of my heart I thought were permanently darkened. Like Darcy, I find myself transformed by your influence, more hopeful, more willing to risk vulnerability for the chance at genuine connection. Sarah treasured that letter above all others, reading it so many times that she could recite entire passages from memory. She began leaving small gifts along with her letters, pressed flowers from her walks, photographs of particularly beautiful sunsets, handwritten copies of poems that reminded her of their correspondence. Marcus reciprocated with bookmarks made from vintage sheet music, pressed leaves from the college campus, and once a small watercolor painting of the bookshop where she lived. Painted from memory, with remarkable detail and artistic skill. Their exchange became a courtship, conducted entirely through written words and small tokens of affection. More romantic than any traditional dating experience Sarah had ever had. She realized that she was learning to love not just Marcus, but the art of correspondence itself, the anticipation of each letter, the careful crafting of responses, the way their relationship was built on intellectual and emotional connection, rather than physical attraction or superficial compatibility. As winter deepened and the new year approached, both Sarah and Marcus began to hint at the possibility of meeting in person. The suggestion appeared first in Marcus's letters, tentative and uncertain, wrapped in qualifications and escape clauses. "I know our correspondence has been unconventional," he wrote, "and perhaps the magic exists only in these letters, in the safety of written words and imagined encounters. But I find myself curious about the sound of your voice, the way you move through the world, the expressions that cross your face when you read something that moves you. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee with no expectations beyond satisfying curiosity? I would understand completely if you prefer to keep our connection as it is, perfect and untouchable in its current form." Sarah's hands trembled as she read his suggestion, her heart racing with equal parts excitement and terror. The prospect of meeting Marcus thrilled her, but she also feared that reality might disappoint after the perfection of their written relationship. She had fallen in love with his mind, his soul, his way of seeing the world. But what if they lacked chemistry in person? What if the magic that existed on paper couldn't survive the harsh light of actual interactions? She spent days crafting her response, writing and rewriting until she had captured exactly the right tone of hopeful nervousness. "I would love to meet you," she finally wrote, "though I admit the prospect terrifies me as much as it excites me. Our letters have been the most beautiful relationship I've ever experienced, and part of me wants to preserve that perfection forever. But I also find myself dreaming about conversations that don't require waiting for postal delivery, about seeing the expressions that accompany your thoughtful observations, about discovering whether the connection we've built through words can flourish in the three-dimensional world. Shall we meet at the coffee shop on Main Street this Saturday at 2? I'll be carrying a copy of our beloved Neruda, just in case we need him to break the ice." Saturday arrived, gray and drizzly, the kind of day that seemed designed for staying indoors with hot tea and good books. Sarah changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, paired with the vintage cardigan she had been wearing the day she received Marcus's first letter. She arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, claiming a table by the window where she could watch for anyone who might be looking for a woman with a poetry book. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she waited, alternately excited and terrified about finally meeting the man who had captured her heart through carefully crafted sentences and profound observations. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was actually happening, she felt woefully unprepared for the reality of transitioning from letters to life. At exactly 2 o'clock, she saw a tall, slender man with dark hair and kind eyes approaching the coffee shop, and something in his hesitant gait. He was more handsome than she had imagined, with an intellectual attractiveness that perfectly matched the thoughtful voice she had come to know through his letters. When he entered the shop and their eyes met across the room, Sarah felt a shock of recognition that had nothing to do with physical appearance and everything to do with souls recognizing each other. Marcus approached her table with a shy smile, and when he spoke her name, his voice was exactly as she had imagined it, warm, cultured, with a slight hesitation that suggested both nervousness and careful consideration of words. "Sarah," he said, simply, and in that single word she heard all the tenderness and admiration that had filled months of correspondence. The conversation that followed was initially awkward, both of them struggling to translate the easy intimacy of their letters into spoken interactions. But gradually, as they shared stories and observations over coffee and pastries, the same connection that had flourished on paper began to bloom in person. Marcus was indeed quiet and thoughtful, choosing his words carefully, but when he spoke about literature or shared observations about life, his face lit up with passion and intelligence that made Sarah's heart flutter. She found herself relaxing in his presence, discovering that the chemistry she had feared might be missing was actually stronger in person than she had dared hope. Their conversation flowed from books to dreams to childhood memories, covering ground that might have taken weeks to explore through letters. Sarah learned that Marcus had grown up in a small town similar to Millbrook, that he had always been the quiet kid who preferred books to sports, that he had found his calling in teaching because it allowed him to share his love of literature with young minds, hungry for meaning and beauty. In return, she shared her own journey from business major to freelance editor to aspiring novelist, explaining how her love of words had ultimately led her to this small town and unknowingly to him. As the afternoon stretched into evening, neither wanted to end their first meeting, but Marcus eventually walked her home through the gently falling snow, both of them marveling at how natural it felt to finally be in each other's physical presence. At her doorstep, Marcus took her hand gently and said, "Thank you for taking the risk of meeting me. I was afraid that our letters had created something too perfect to exist in reality. But this afternoon has been even more wonderful than I had dared imagine." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice, and she realized that their months of correspondence had not been preparation for love, but love itself, expressed in its purest form through the meeting of minds and hearts on paper. Their courtship continued to unfold with the same thoughtful deliberation that had characterized their correspondence, but now enhanced by the joy of physical presence and spoken conversation. Marcus proved to be everything his letters had promised: intelligent, kind, deeply romantic, in an old-fashioned way that made Sarah feel cherished and understood. They spent long evenings reading together in comfortable silence, sharing favorite passages aloud, discussing the books that had shaped their worldviews and dreams. Sarah discovered that Marcus was an excellent cook who delighted in preparing elaborate meals while she sat at his kitchen counter, editing manuscripts or working on her novel, which she had finally found the courage to resume. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day, built on the solid foundation of intellectual compatibility and emotional intimacy they had established through months of letters. Sarah realized that what they had created was rare and precious, a love based on truly knowing each other on appreciating each other's minds and souls before physical attraction had even entered the equation. When Marcus finally kissed her on a snowy evening in February as they walked back from the college library, it felt like the natural culmination of months of emotional courtship rather than a first romantic gesture. The kiss was gentle, reverent, full of all the tenderness and longing that had been building through their written words, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just love, but her perfect complement, the person who understood her in ways she had never thought possible. As spring arrived and brought new life to their small town, Sarah and Marcus began making plans for their future together. Their love story, having proven that the most beautiful romances begin not with physical attraction or convenient circumstances, but with the meeting of two souls who recognize each other across whatever distance or obstacles separate them. They continued to write each other letters, even though they saw each other daily, preserving the tradition that had brought them together and ensuring that their love would always be documented in the careful, thoughtful words that had first revealed their hearts to each other. Their wedding, held in the garden behind Mrs. Henderson's bookshop on a perfect June day, was attended by family and friends who marveled at the obvious deep connection between the quiet professor and the gentle editor, though none of them knew the full story of how two shy souls had found each other through the ancient art of letter writing and the courage to believe that true love was worth the risk of vulnerability.